Welcome. In this lecture, we're going to talk about 3 ways of defining religion according to Catherine Albanese. Now, there are many conceptual frameworks that we can use to think about different kinds of definitions of religion. I want to introduce one just to kind of get you thinking about different kinds of definitions. So this will be good to get us started. Catherine Albanese suggests that there are, as I mentioned, 3 ways of defining religion: substantive, functional, and formal. The best way to remember these terms is to remember the roots of the word. The roots of substantive is substance. The root of functional is function, and the root of formal is form. All right, substance, function, and form. These are the ways that we're going to define religion. Now, a substantive definition is defined, you guessed it, by substance, its essence, what it is, what it believes, its truth, its meaning. To quote Catherine Albanese, substantive definitions focus on the inner core, the essence, or the nature of religion. Okay, so what does it think? What is its truth? You can pick your thinking term, philosophy or theology, or concepts, theories, beliefs, many others. These kind of definitions are favored by theologians and philosophers because theologians and philosophers are all about the highest truth, or the highest way of knowing, or the highest wisdom. To oversimplify, theology is kind of like philosophy that believes in God. Philosophy is looking for the ultimate truth, or the ultimate way of knowing, or the ultimate wisdom. And if you happen to believe in God, you believe that ultimate truth, or that ultimate wisdom exists in and comes from God. But again, substantive definitions are all about the essence, what religion believes, what its truth is. Okay? Now, you may not have thought through this yet, but substantive definitions are very difficult to write. Why would that be? Because the world religions believe very different things. So if you want to come up with a definition of religion that would say, religion by definition believes this, what are you going to come up with that all the world religions believe? All right? So we'll talk about that a little bit more when I get done with the other 2, but suffice to say, substantive definitions are really challenging because religions believe very different things. Functional definitions are a little bit easier, and they're used a lot more. Functional definitions are defined by function. What does the religion do? How does it work? To quote Catherine Albanese, functional definitions emphasize the effects of religion in actual life. Now, these are going to be favored by social scientists, people in the social sciences, like sociologists and psychologists, or maybe cultural anthropologists. They're interested in how religion works in individuals' life and in the lives of individuals in society. If you are a sociologist, for instance, you're going to probably be writing a functional definition of religion. And furthermore, it's going to focus on how religion functions in society. Religion may legitimate the social structure. Legitimate is a fancy sociological word that indicates giving it an extra validation, almost like a sacredness. Religion might say that the social structure is the way it is because God intended it that way. So you're not just fulfilling your duties in society to be accepted by society, but you'd be doing it to please God. That's just one narrow example of religious legitimation in society. Religion can also challenge society. Religion can maybe challenge the ethical norms in society, or challenge the social structure and tell you this is not the way it's supposed to be, and challenge you to have a higher allegiance to your religious truth than what your society considers to be the ultimate commitment. Now, psychologists obviously are worried about how religion affects individuals, and sociologists more about how religion works in society, affects individuals in community. Now, you might think, and I might say you'd be right to think this most of the time, you might think that believers would be more likely to write functional definitions of religion that would be positive, and non-believers, atheists, would be more likely to write functional definitions of religion that would be negative. And most of the time you would be correct, but that is not always the case. Let me give you an example, a couple hypothetical examples here. Imagine that I am very committed to my religion. I love God with all my heart, but I'm a historian. And I see clearly that in history, religion has caused an awful lot of wars. And whatever theoretical sensibility it makes to think that, the more religion spread out, the more peace there would be on earth, any historian knows there's no precedent for that kind of conclusion. Religion has actually, if it didn't start conflicts, it has certainly legitimated a lot of conflicts. And once you say that someone is doing God's will, they'll commit themselves much more to it often, and are more willing to do things that they might not have been willing to do otherwise. So I might actually be a believer that loves God with all my heart, but that actually thinks that religion has been a pretty negative thing in the history of civilizations. Make sense? Now let's look at it the other way around. I might be an atheist, and I might actually have a good opinion of religion. Really? Yes. Let's imagine a French sociologist named Emile Durkheim. Durkheim is a philosophical atheist. He doesn't really think a higher order or God exists, but he thinks that religion has actually been a positive thing in human society, in history. He does not think we would have developed the level of civilization, the peaceful kind of civilization that we have today, were it not for religious legitimation. So he doesn't really believe necessarily that something is God's command, but if you believe it's God's command, you're more likely to keep it, and that's a good thing. And we can give many other examples. Now, does this seem a little strange to you? Let me give you an example here. Little boy is 2 years old, and he can't sleep at night. He's scared. He thinks there might be monsters under the bed. So you bring him in this big, fluffy blue blanket, and you say, this is a magic blanket. Hold it very tightly, and the monsters under the bed will be scared, and they'll run away, and they can't hurt you. And he sleeps like a baby. Well, he is a baby. Question, did the blanket work? Well, it depends what you think it was supposed to do. If you think it was supposed to destroy monsters or make them run away, well, then it didn't really work. I assume you don't think that monsters really exist under the beds of 2-year-old boys. But if the purpose of the blanket was to help the young boy sleep, it worked beautifully, didn't it? Anthropologists often look at prehistoric religious beliefs as being superstitions much like this. They don't actually reflect a real understanding of spiritual power, and they don't actually work the way people think that they work, or people thought that they work, but they did work to add some kind of a semblance of order to the world, and gave prehistoric humans something to trust in, which worked out very, very well for them. But as with most philosophical atheists, most anthropologists would say that hanging on to these ideas would not be beneficial today. They call these ideas that have survived since prehistoric times, but really no longer are functioning the way they're supposed to. Everybody kind of knows they don't work. They call them survivals. And if you happen to be an anthropologist who is a philosophical atheist, you probably see religion as one of these survivals, almost like the magic blanket. It might give people some comfort, it might give them some confidence, and so you can say it's doing what it's supposed to, but the beliefs really aren't founded in reality, and that's the way they would see it. So what they would be hoping, as any philosophical atheist would, is that we would, evolve already, darn it. Hoping the whole human race will finally get to a point where they leave these prehistoric superstitions behind and trust in our much more well-developed knowledge of science, trust in what we know is true. However, religion hangs on like crazy. We're going to talk more about this. Now imagine this little boy with the blanket. If you've ever had a child, that had a favorite blanket or blankie, or if you've known someone that did. When the time comes when the parent feels like it's time for the child to let the blankie go, it can be quite a problem. Some parents try to throw the blankie away and the kid keeps pulling it out of the trash, brings it into the house all nasty and dirty, and it can be a real problem to get the kid to give blankie away. Some parents try to make deals with their kids and, trip to Disneyland if you let blankie go. No, I like blankie more than Mickey Mouse. Anyway, the idea is, once the kid is 5 or 6, the kid should have reached a point where the kid realizes that the blankie isn't a magic cure against monsters and ought to be willing to let it go. But kids don't let it go that easily sometimes. Imagine, if you were, a man with an MBA who is a CEO of a major corporation that's going through a merger. And at 40 years old, he comes to a meeting of the board members to discuss the merger. He walks in a $5,000 Armani suit, and he has this tattered blanket over his shoulder that he's had since childhood because he thinks the merger is going to go better if he has blankie with him. That's exactly how a philosophical atheist sees humans hanging on to religion today, not wanting to let go of something they should have realized a long time ago doesn't work. So, why am I telling you this much about why atheists see religion the way they do? Because I want you to understand that Durkheim, in a sense, sees religion in the same way, but he actually thinks it's been a very beneficial thing in, again, coming to the level of civilization we've been at now. The question is, of course, do we still need it? And anyway, functional definitions of religion can be positive, and they can be negative. If the scholar is truly objective, in my opinion, they ought to be able to present the positives and the negatives. Psychologically, here's some of the positive effects religion has had in the lives of people who were really quite lost. I mean, they led miserable lives, they had substance abuse problems, they had relationship problems, they had very negative reactions to many triggers in their life, and they had some religious experience, and little by little they became a better person. But then you can also look at psychological effects of religion that would be considered very negative. Almost in a Freudian sense. You could look at religion as being accompanying an obsessive, a universal guilty neurosis. Is it the disease or the symptom of the disease? I don't know. Freud seems to have gone back and forth, but the point is, he has nothing good to say about religion. And there are other behavioral scientists who would fall in that category as well. Sometimes what you're looking at when you're dealing with someone like this is not only what we call a functional definition, but we might call it a reductionist definition. Reductionist or reductional definitions, if you want to use that adjective, involve explaining religion, but not so much explaining it as explaining it away. All right, explaining it away. And you'll see that Freud and Marx, and there are many other people that are famous for doing this. They're trying to explain why religion exists at the same time that they are either trying to explain why it shouldn't or trying to explain how it would be better if it didn't. So when we talk about reductionistic definitions, they are reducing religion to the effects of something else. They're explaining it. They're explaining the phenomenon. They're explaining it away, in a sense. Not really acknowledging religion as a thing that deserves to be thought of sui generis, to be thought of as its own thing. Let's move on to formal definitions of religion. Formal definitions are defined by form. Now, when we say formal, get tuxedos and evening gowns out of your mind. We've narrowed the definition of this word substantially. Formal just means the way things appear. So if I have a formal definition, I am writing a definition that says this thing I'm defining appears like this, it looks like this. These are the features you're going to observe when you see it. To quote Catherine Albanese, formal definitions look for typically religious forms gleaned from the comparative study of religions, and they find the presence of religion where such forms can be identified. Historians of religion would very much favor this kind of a definition. In this kind of definition, you're not really trying to define what all religions believe. You're not even specifically trying to define how they function. You're just trying to identify where they appear. So if you were studying, say, an ancient civilization or even something in the Middle Ages, and you see different behaviors of people, you might look and go, oh, that's religious behavior. I mean, that indicates religious beliefs there. We know what religion looks like. There's you heard the old saying, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, waddles like a duck, it's probably a duck. If you saw me right now get down on the floor, bend my knees and bow down and put my hands together and bow my head and close my eyes, you'd say, that's crazy. Why is the professor praying now? My point is, you know what religion looks like. You know what religious practice looks like. And so now that we've gone through the different features of religion, and we know how to recognize different aspects of religion, when we look at society, we can pick out certain aspects of human behavior or whatever, and we can say that's religious behavior. That looks like religion to me. So we're just trying to identify where these religious ideas appear without necessarily defining what everybody believes or how these things specifically work in the lives of people. Finally, we might also be talking about how these things function. You can write a definition of religion that can be both functional and formal. You can write a definition of religion that can be both substantive and functional. Okay, everything doesn't pigeonhole really nicely. If I said, for instance, that all religions contain myths and rituals that bind the community together, I've started out with formal. I've said you're going to recognize sacred stories and you're going to recognize sacred practices, but then I went on to the functional. I said that these sacred stories and sacred practices are going to kind of bind the community together around their shared beliefs and practices. So that definition would have a formal aspect, but also a functional aspect. Does that make sense? Again, let me say that substantive definitions are going to generally be the hardest ones to write. Now, let me say one other thing on this here. Remember back when we were talking about the features of religion, and there was a section there after the ultimate concern section that we titled Higher Order. And we started out by saying religion believes and teaches that there is a higher order. That's a belief. So when you say that religion believes and teaches something, that's a substantive definition. So although religions have very, very different ideas what that truer reality is, that higher order is, if you will, everything from a personal God to an idea of karma or an idea of the great emptiness or whatever. Fact is, there is something more real than what we perceive in this world. So that's a successful substantive definition of religion. Even though there's great diversity in what religions believe, that kind of encompasses them all. Okay? But let's go a little bit farther down in that same category, and you'll see that quote by William James. Religion consists of the belief that there is an unseen order, and that our greatest good is in being in harmony with it. My paraphrase, since the language is a little bit clunky. This is masterful. This may be the best substantive definition of religion I've ever heard personally. William James starts where we did. We talk about the higher order. He says an unseen order, something that is not normally perceived by people. Very good. And but he goes on to say that the belief that goes along with it in religion in general is that it is more beneficial for us to be in harmony with this unseen order than it is to attempt to be in harmony with the seen order. And so he's added an aspect to it, and this makes it really masterful, because even though religions have very different ideas of what it means to be in harmony with the ultimate, and very different ideas of what the ultimate is, William James's definition really does work for all religions. So again, this is a wonderful example of a masterful substantive definition of religion. Maybe you'll appreciate it more now that you know how difficult it is to write a substantive definition of religion. Very good. This completes our short lecture on the 3 ways of defining religion according to Catherine Albanese, and I will see you for the next lecture.